Hi, and welcome to Data for Future, episode 18. In this episode, I will interview a great expert in machine learning and deep learning, Daniyal Shahrokhian. This interview turned out to be a bit longer than expected, therefore we will divide it into two parts. In the first part, I will speak with Daniyal about his experience in developing AI algorithms to detect digital manipulation on the internet, something which seems to gain more evidence and more importance each year. In the second part, stay tuned to find out Daniyal's perspective about the reality of working in an AI startup nowadays. And finally, his top personal tips on becoming a machine learning engineer, also for self-learners like many of us. This is part 1. In case you wonder how we relate digital manipulation with sustainability topics, well, let me tell you a short story of mine. In fact, this is the topic that drew my attention in the first place towards AI and digitalization in general and its effects on our day-to-day lives, democracies, and political systems. In university, I wrote a thesis with the goal to understand if fake news and social bots had a significant influence on our political opinions. I carried out a social experiment to present people different types of fake news online and analyzed the gathered data using the SPSS software. I was able to find that even the most ridiculous fake news found their way into people's minds, influencing their views. Digital manipulation and fake news are being spread with the goal to reinforce negative stereotypes about certain groups of people, to stimulate hatred, even to justify wars. Its goal is to divide and conquer. And I believe only together we can reach any of the sustainable development goals. Therefore, listen carefully and enjoy. Vamos. So, Daniyal, thank you very, very much for joining us today. We have a new wonderful guest in our show who has been having a great experience in deep learning and topics of digital manipulation, which is becoming more and more obvious nowadays. So I'm really glad to find somebody with expertise in this kind of domain. Briefly, Daniyal holds a master's degree in data science and entrepreneurship. He's been working in deep learning for 4 years and worked on incredible projects, like projects related to smart cities and, as I said, digital manipulation, and has done some research in emotion recognition. So you have quite an amazing broad experience throughout your career. And before we dive into our discussion, would you like to share what is your personal passion about AI and deep learning and tech in general?
Sure. First of all, thank you for inviting me to here. I think that in my case, as like of many people that jumped into this kind of like AI boom, I think the most interesting part is the fact that you can bring a lot of innovation when something really new pops up, right? You saw that back in the .com era with the websites. You saw that in the with mobile devices when they came out. So I guess that yes, AI is like just the next one, which kind of aligned with the time in which I kind of started my professional career, right? Mm-hmm. I think for me particularly, it's just really interesting trying to kind of like build intelligent systems that, even though like the AI, like artificial intelligence term, is kind of controversial because it's not really intelligence for most of it. I just really find fascinating the process of like formalizing this kind of like thought process or intelligence.
Yeah.
And I think that's the primary reason that I started working in the field. I just really liked, the concept of like that you can build a model that can detect cars. That was when I kind of like got the whoa moment. Yeah. And from there, I just, as you said, I tried to work in different projects. just trying to explore like what is possible with technology. And primarily, like many of those projects, I acknowledge that would have not been feasible if you go back, like let's say 8 years or 9 years before all this like deep learning revolution. So yeah, just trying to kind of like pursue to create something new and valuable, and AI is kind of like the technology to do that at this point.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, AI has been there, if I'm correct, for over 70 years already. So we're kind of like surfing the wave of this technological boom nowadays, but it has been there.
Definitely.
Yeah. So the first thing I would like to talk to you about is the digital manipulation, because you worked on projects that detected digital manipulation in the internet. Yeah, I'm really curious about how you develop these algorithms. But first of all, I would like to ask you, what do you define in general as digital manipulation?
Right. I think that the term itself depends on like what manipulation is really about. Manipulation is trying to change the thoughts or the action of an individual for your own benefit.
Would you say advertisement is manipulation?
Yeah, like I think it's just a variant of like manipulation itself by using the digital tools that we have nowadays, websites, social networks, the access to like user information. And in itself, like digital manipulation is very broad, right? There is like so many different things that are considered like social media manipulation or digital manipulation. The most common that people know about is like fake news, like trying to send basically like stating some news or facts that are not true for the interest of a third party. There is things like trying to optimize SEO, like Google searches for showing first results first. All that goes down to like trying to impact the user in any form. Me personally, when it comes to algorithms, I think that most of the things that I was focusing on during my year at working in this startup in London, Screen, it's primarily just trying to differentiate between organic and inorganic activity. That's like kind of like one of the ways that you can try to approach the problem. There is so many different ways, by the way. But yeah, that's like one big topic to discuss itself.
Yeah. Was it anomaly detection? Am I right in this case?
Yeah. So what you can approach the problem, technically speaking, like from different ways. Anomaly detection is definitely one of them, in which you try to kind of like model how a real human will behave in comparison to a bot that is kind of like following a set of rules or automated. And in itself, is a very challenging task to do that, even like with such a kind of like simple framework, because even yourself as a human, when you interact with social media, you are a simplified version of yourself. Maybe one of these bots can actually like track down users and see what are their kind of like variables and trying to replicate them with their own bots. So it's not like anomaly detection that you would do in other scenarios in which like, you know, you have a continuous set of variables and you can detect whether some variables are anomalous and to trigger those algorithms. This is a kind of like a ever-changing scenario, and that's what makes the problem, in my opinion, almost impossible to solve, like entirely.
But well, in the case of the algorithms you developed, how well did it work? Like, what was the accuracy of discovering this kind of activity?
So again, it's really hard to tell because we don't have ground truth. You know, you don't know which, like, you don't have access to like all the bots that are out there.
You don't know how many there are.
Yeah. And you don't know if your data that you are, for example, let's say that I use a data set in which I can put like bots and non-bots in that data set. According to the time passed, sure, I can give you a bound of like how accurate it was, but I can never tell you how accurate it is for today's standards. Maybe because those accounts were already banned, the bot providers changed their behavior, and maybe my algorithms don't work anymore. It's not like traditional machine learning in which kind of like the data never changes drastically. Maybe it changes a bit. That's why you have these kind of like active learning frameworks in which like you tune your algorithms over time.
Mm-hmm.
But in our case, it can change completely drastically. Maybe a very easy example is that our data does not come from like a real world or like something that is kind of predictable. It comes from users. The users that create those bots generate this data. So as in, for example, let's say that you are doing like object detection and you try to detect cars or persons, pedestrians. These do not change radically from one year to another. They maybe change the clothing style in the case of people, but you still have a head, you have two arms, two legs. That doesn't change. In the same case for cars, like they always have four wheels, the doors, kind of like the shape. And that's what makes the kind of like the setting really hard to tackle. To answer your question, maybe the closest answer that I have is that the algorithms were able to spot a lot of bots. Like we found the algorithms. Yeah, I mean, not hundreds, like thousands of bots. But again, we do not have access to the entire population, so I don't know what is the bound. But if you start with a data set, like the algorithms can definitely be over 99% accurate. But that doesn't mean that in terms of like the real world scenario is going to be that accurate.
Yeah, again, I guess this is the unending problem of data scientists, not enough data for this kind of questions to answer. Yeah. Well, and you've seen probably lots of cases which algorithm discovered as manipulation. Which ones like have shocked you the most that you've seen, or what you found really like ridiculous, or I don't know, something really unusual that you have seen there?
Yeah, like when people ask me, I always give the same example because I just find it so funny. I think that the main one was like the presidential campaign, the US elections in 2016, and like all the story of like the Russian government trying to interfere in the elections themselves. And at some point in 2017, the Twitter kind of like gathered a lot of information about like which, like a huge chunk of like which accounts were behind this kind of like attack. And so researchers and analysts jumped into the data set and see like what they could find. And for me, like the most interesting insight in one of the papers was that this set of researchers found a number of accounts which they analyzed like the tweeting time behavior. And you will see that in these like hundreds of accounts, the tweeting behavior was like in Russian time from 9 a.m. until 5:30 p.m. The Twitter accounts were only tweeting in those time frames. And to make it even more ridiculous, those hundreds of accounts were never tweeting between, I think it was 1:30 and 2:30.
Yeah.
Guess why?
I guess they weren't paid well enough to work in the night. I don't know.
No. I mean, like 1:30 p.m. and 2:30 p.m. is like literally the lunch break.
Yeah. No, I mean, I guess they weren't well paid enough so that they could shift to the night times, or I don't know.
Yeah, or like even like you can like schedule like a cron job that kind of does that. But it was so funny like to see those hundreds of accounts. You put them in like kind of like a time graph. And you would see like the tweeting behavior is so ridiculously like, predictable,
Didn't you think that maybe somebody made it on purpose, to falsificate Russians and say, oh, look at this. Data scientists will notice it.
Yeah, that did cross my mind. And maybe that is the case. I honestly do not know what was the truth behind it. But like when it was found out, it was like it was just ridiculous.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, I mean, Well, we talked for this to the second time about Russians, but it's not only Russian problem. I think Cambridge Analytica is the most famous case of all that the world has seen so far.
Yeah.
And they were present in so many countries, so that it doesn't concern just Russians or Ukrainians or
Definitely.
Americans. I think it's about all of us. Yeah. And so when this kind of content is spotted, what was like happening then? You found this strange activity. Do you like go to Facebook and say, "Hey, we found this fake news," or whatever?
So from a company perspective, definitely we are not Twitter, right? We cannot ban those accounts or whatever. We can only like share that information. In that scenario, I think it was a more of a passive role in which like you just provide the information and you let the user or client to do whatever they want. In many cases, it's just like show this proof to the social media platforms and for them to take action. Because every single like social network like Twitter, Facebook, Reddit, they have a huge team behind like this kind of like platform safety role per se.
Yeah. But do you know any of the like cases or decisions that they made like, with this content?
Definitely, in one of the scenarios, they banned the accounts because they were so clearly bots. And in other cases, maybe just restrictions, or maybe one of the biggest actions I think that happened after the US election is that they emphasize a lot more on like their hashtag scoring, like trending hashtag scoring, because it was during the elections, it was heavily influenced by bots. So this kind of like attack is called hashtag bombing, in which like you try to increase the score of the hashtag so it's shown to like more users. Again, I do not know exactly what the social media platforms did, but from what you can see like publicly available, those were the things.
Yeah, that's pretty sad. But I guess it's not only the in case of this kind of unusual activity and digital manipulation. In general, there is no transparency to what the big tech companies do. Well, I'm kind of asking myself, why didn't they hire like your company was like a particular company. I mean, a different company. You were not from like hired by Facebook. Do I understand it correctly?
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I'm asking myself, why didn't Facebook hire such a team for them, or YouTube, or Twitter, all of these big platforms?
Yeah, and I think that the primary thing is that it's not part of their business model
Yeah,
to protect brands. And honestly speaking, like if I thought as like a social media provider, it would be definitely impossible for me to like protect and kind of like monitor every single topic that is going on. Because at the end of the day, our argument of as a company like trying to, or whichever company is doing this sort of like preventing misinformation or fake news, is that clients can go directly to those companies and they can request their services for like kind of like protection or like analysis. You can hire a company that actively, like as a independent entity, monitors like what's going on in different social media platforms for you. And that makes more sense to be like an external company. You can think of it as like the first antiviruses that appeared in the late 80s or early 90s. It should be task of the operating system maintainer to develop those antiviruses. But since it was so out of scope at that time, nowadays you already have like Windows Defender and things like that are kind of like good enough. There were third-party companies that were like, okay, we're going to prevent attacks for you if you buy your software. It's kind of like the main argument that the startups use in this domain is that we are kind of like the antivirus of for social media.
And who financed the activity of the startup? I mean, did these companies pay you for the services, the social media platforms?
Yeah.
Yeah?
You have contracts per se in that scenario.
Well, I guess then they do care, at least to some extent, what's happening there.
Yeah,
if they hire such companies.
But I must admit that even though like the topic itself is everywhere in like mainstream media and everything, most companies do not see it as a threat yet. They still see it as like something that maybe is like not so important, and it's really really hard to sell this kind of like service. I can tell you that.
Yeah. Well, I can imagine, and from your perspective, all right. So the companies don't really want to, I don't know, to pay lots of money and to take responsibility of these issues. In your opinion, then, whose responsibility is this really? Is it like ours, users, or should governments issue some laws making it mandatory to hire companies like the one you worked in?
My personal subjective opinion is that this is not by itself solvable by anybody.
Not solvable. Mm-hmm.
Not solvable. Because there is no like one bullet that can like solve the issue without having consequences. This in terms of like free speech.
Mm-hmm.
When it comes to like fake news, for example, in particular, like if these kind of like facts are old enough, then you have fact-checking websites that do that kind of like role.
Mm-hmm.
And that actually some social media networks actually use these platforms. Like, I don't know which ones they use, but there is this thing called Snoops, and I think there's another startup in London called Factmata.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. We actually might interview them as well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
that's interesting.
Actually, I know one engineer that was working there as well.
Really?
And
world is so small.
Huh?
The world is so small.
Yeah. And when we spoke, like we both agreed, kind of like this is not something that is, at least we perceive as like non-solvable without having certain consequences. So maybe to answer your question, I don't know who should be the one responsible for it. I just know that, for example, as a social media platform, it's impossible to like monitor everything. Maybe in the future, like AI systems would be good enough to do this kind of like policing. But as of today, we need humans, and to like the amount of information that is being shared in these social media platforms, there is no way that humans can be monitoring everything.
Yeah, like in my personal opinion, it's I think it's the responsibility of everyone, and from our side to just be. I believe if people are educated and they are willing to educate themselves and to really find the truth and not just follow straightforward what's being said in media, then this is what I found in the thesis. People who had this kind of attitude were not so susceptible to manipulation in social media. Well, really interesting.
I think in that case, I think they are also like digging into like the human mind itself, because every like maybe some humans less than others, but everybody has some kind of like bias towards their beliefs. That's been it's not a problem of like just social media manipulation. It's like a problem of like the human mind for
life
thousands of years. It's in the same way that even nowadays with like access to information, if I believe in something and I try to search for facts, I will always prioritize the facts or the websites that align with my
proof.
With my mindset. And even I worked in this field trying to develop these algorithms, and I still suffer from this. I still acknowledge that I have this bias, and it's not something that you can just acknowledge it and then discard it. It's there.
Yeah, it's there. It will always be. Yeah, this is something it's a very interesting point you're mentioning now. And I think you're the first data scientist who has told me this. People who are in this kind of story that work with data, I mean, we love numbers, right? Numbers they are so clear, so objective. But the world, unfortunately, is not everything is quantifiable. We have to admit it.
Yeah.
Have I understood you right? You said that this problem is not solvable because once you try to prevent some content spreading, it's like censorship problem.
Yeah.
Yeah. So like who is gonna tell what's fake news, what's not? Okay.
Exactly.
It's I think it's very philosophical issue.
Yeah. I think it's more philosophical than technical itself.
Yeah.
It's not about like solving a defined problem. It's about like understanding that the problem maybe is not when like you see it online, like, oh, the social media platforms are responsible for this, but you have to like maybe backtrack a bit and try to find that even though the numbers say something, maybe the origin of the issue is something more deeply embedded into ourselves.
Definitely.
But what is the concept of data dignity?
It's a very big topic, but one thing that was discussed in the paper I was reading was that if there is just one platform like YouTube, super popular platform, it's like the modern TV, then it's just not possible for this one platform to block some content that nobody wants without being authoritarian, this kind of thing. You know what I mean?
And that is definitely the issue.
They cannot say for everybody like universal truth, this is bad content, this is good content.
Exactly. And even further, like thinking about past history of like doing this in the past. Morality and cultural kind of like settings evolve over time. And maybe what we think as cultural fit today is really not in the future.
I hope you enjoyed this interview as much as I did. In the next one, we will talk about the truth of working in an AI startup, as well as personal tips on how to become a self-taught machine learning engineer. Stay tuned. I'll see you in the part 2.